You've decided you're ready to become a parent, and suddenly you're overwhelmed with people who feel they have the right to inform you on the correct way to conceive, give birth, what fears you should have, and the proper way to parent. How do you filter through the opinions? How do you know what's trustworthy information and what's a myth or just plain outdated? Welcome to the Birth Ease podcast. Join your host Michelle Smith and her guests as they cut through the noise and fear by sharing valuable tips, tools, and proven methods that help you connect with your own inner wisdom as you navigate the sacred journey that is pregnancy, birth, and parenthood in a more relaxed and confident manner. This podcast does not constitute, nor is it intended, as medical advice.
Hello, Birth Ease families. Welcome to this heartfelt space. I'm your host, Michelle Smith, and I want to welcome you to this very special Listening to Midwives series. And it is my intention in this series to create a sacred space for midwives to voice what's on their heart and in their mind, and ultimately what's in their soul. This series is for any that love and support midwives, or anyone that wants a deeper understanding of what midwifery care is. Today, I'm so incredibly excited and honored to have with me Mary Surprenant. Mary attended the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery, and she was licensed in 2013. She began her vocation as a midwife, providing care to families in the birth center and the home birth setting, and she did that for over 5 years. She now has her own home birth practice, Blessings in Abundance, and she created this practice in order to focus more on home birth and reconnecting with her clients and their families as a whole. Her passion is helping Central Florida families bring their child into a more peaceful world in the most loving way. Welcome, Mary, to the Birth Ease podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate you giving me a voice in this tremendous time.
Yes, that's why I wanted to do this interview, because with the coronavirus pandemic and all the uncertainty that it is bringing with it, so many families are searching for alternatives for their baby's birth because they're frankly frightened at the thought of going into the hospital. So again, I'm so grateful to have you here because I want to discuss just the differences between the different types of midwifery care, what home birth can look like, what birth center birth is like, so that people have a deeper understanding of what that all entails.
Yes, and living in the state of Florida, our women are very lucky because they have a multitude of different choices. Depending on where you live will depend on the type of midwives that are there for you.
Yeah, it can vary by state.
Yes.
In some states, home birth is even illegal.
Correct.
Some states it's gray, but some it's illegal.
Some states it's a gray area. Some states it is illegal. But there are a multitude of states that it is legal. And even in those states, you have two different types of midwives. So I think it would be good just to get into that discussion of the types of midwives, and then we can go from there.
Yes, absolutely, please.
Okay. So since I am in the state of Florida, we'll talk about that a little bit first. So in the state of Florida, we have two types of midwives. We have CNMs, which is a certified nurse midwife, and an LM, which is a licensed midwife. So a certified nurse midwife is someone who went to nursing school and then went beyond and got her ARNP, strictly in midwifery. So what that means is once they got their bachelor's degree, they went on and got either a master's degree or even now I believe it's a doctorate degree in midwifery from their nursing. And the nurse midwives generally work in the hospital under a physician. However, we are very lucky in our Central Florida area and in the state of Florida that we do have some nurse midwives that do work outside of the hospital in a birthing center or home birth situation. The nurse midwives can take care of low risk and high risk moms, seeing how they can deliver both out of hospital and in the hospital. Then that brings us to licensed midwives, in which I am licensed midwifery. You go to school for a direct entry, if you would say. Most of us do have some type of a background in the medical field, and that's what brought us to the midwifery forefront. Myself, I had a nursing assisting and phlebotomy education behind me, and that's what led me to look into the whole out of hospital nursing versus being in the hospital and working as an RN. Licensed midwives, we are taught and centered around safe and low risk birth. So what does that mean, low risk? We're taking care of the mamas that don't have high blood pressure issues, that don't have the gestational diabetes, that are very uncomplicated, day by day, very easy going pregnancies. We're taught the complications that could arise in birth. So we're really good at knowing normalcy. And we also know the parameters when mamas need outside help. So we're taught what preeclampsia looks like. We're taught how to detect a breech baby. We're taught how to manage postpartum hemorrhage. We have all the life-saving stuff with the Pitocin and IV meds, but we use them when it's needed. Not every mama that we come in contact is going to need an IV, but I have it if it's needed. We have the oxygen on hand at every single birth. If a mama needs it, we use it. But being low risk, most of the time, they don't even need it. And then I talked about a third type of midwife, and this is the certified professional midwife. I believe there are 11 states that they have the nurse midwives, but they don't acknowledge licensed midwifery, and therefore you go through a program to get your certified professional midwifery.
So depending upon which state that you live in, what country you live in, those parameters of the different type of midwife and midwifery care can change, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if someone were considering a home birth, and especially in these times, if they were considering transferring to a birth center or a home birth setting, can you share a little bit what that experience is like? Because so many people are familiar with the hospital routine, the hospital. It's almost like a culture of how we give birth because you see it so often in the movies and television, and that's just how it's done. But there is this other way to give birth. So can you elaborate on what that type of care would be like? One person recently asked me, well, how's my baby going to get a birth certificate? And I usually hear when I'm discussing with clients the possibility of home birth or birth center, well, how am I going to get my sonogram? And so it brings all these questions. And again, you're speaking from the Florida bylaws and guidelines.
Correct. Correct. So in Florida, we are licensed practitioners. So when you do join care with a licensed midwife, you are getting the same schedule and aspects of what you would see with a nurse midwife or an OB. Depending on when you do come into care, we see our clients from every 4 weeks from the time that they start to 28 weeks, and then every 2 weeks until 36 weeks, and then every week until the baby's born. We generally will do the one ultrasound at 20 to 22 weeks for the anatomy. However, there have been times that I've had a mama that had a miscarriage in the past, so we've done an early ultrasound for her. So if there's reasonings that we feel that an early ultrasound is truly going to help us, we'll get an early ultrasound and then the anatomy scan between 20 and 22 weeks. And then at the 28 weeks, we do the glucose testing, which is the drink or meal. And then we draw blood an hour afterwards to test for gestational diabetes. And then we see the client every 2 weeks until 36 weeks. And then we do more blood work with vaginal cultures. And then we prepare for the birth from there on out.
And it's a different type of care also, I think, because in your prenatal visits, it's a very different experience. Most often, just the way our medical system is now, when you're with an obstetrician, you get about 5 minutes with your obstetrician. And I shouldn't laugh because it's not really funny. I'm laughing because it's such a stark difference. And you get a much more
meaningful,
yes,
deepened care.
Thank you. Yes, those are good words. I was thinking intimate care, but your words are very good. Yes.
So typically when you go see an OB, you see your medical assistant who's doing your blood pressure, and then you may see a nurse. Sometimes they'll be the ones that actually listen to the baby. Occasionally the OB will come in and listen to the baby, but it's very quick, in and out, what's going on, not much, okay, see you later. And then any of your questions or concerns or anything that comes up, you're really sitting with the RN when you go and see an OB. When you have a midwife, we are there with you for your whole appointment. Even when I was at the birth center and I had my medical assistant doing her labs and blood pressure and talking with her, showing her how to do the urine dipstick. Even at those times, if I had the moment, I would peek my head in and talk with the client, because this is the time when they are the most willing to open up and say what's going on. There's so many times that we get into the appointments and the provider says, so do you have anything that you wanted to talk about? And it's, oh, no, I don't have anything. But really they do. They look in their phone and they had 5 questions that they needed to ask. But they weren't given that time to think about, oh, wait, let me look about that question that I had 2 weeks ago that really wasn't super important at that time, but it is important to me in my care. So the appointments tend to last about an hour with the midwife from start to finish. And if you don't have questions for them, I promise you they have questions for you. It's not always just about what's going on in your daily activities at that moment, but were engaged with you about taking your childbirth education classes and about finding a pediatrician and about doing research on water birth or not doing a water birth, research on how to prevent tears. I feel like I do many childbirth education classes probably about every other visit for my first time mama, because it can become very, very overwhelming to hear all that information at once.
Right. I know from when I was working in the birth center, each appointment, the way it was laid out here, the bylaws and the standards for midwifery care, birth center care, that there were certain topics that you were required to cover in the appointments for the moms.
Yes, and it depended on where they were at in the pregnancy.
Right.
So from us discussing all of this, you can see that a big part of midwifery care is the relationship that you build with your midwife. Midwifery is a lot more of relationship building. That's why I tell all of my clients that once you're part of the family, you're always family. Just because you've delivered your baby and the baby is now a year old, I still consider you part of the family because of the bond that we built within the time period of prenatals, labor, birth, and then the postpartum.
Right. And sometimes in birth center care, home birth care, we would always tease that families want to have another baby again pretty quickly because they miss that continuity of care. They miss that relationship that's built with your midwife or midwives, because some birth centers have more than one midwife on staff. And depending upon the client load and that type of thing, there's typically more than one midwife. Do sometimes home birth midwives, they can collaborate together in a practice?
Yes, absolutely. There are some practices that have more than one home birth midwife. And even my practice, I am the only midwife, but I have several midwives that are very willing to back me up for the just in case. We try very hard to make sure that I don't have too many clients and that I can be present at all the births. But sometimes babies have their own agendas and they want to come when we're not exactly available.
They want to be born with their friends.
Yes. They want to have another birthday partner.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, which it doesn't happen that often. But one of the things I think for families to consider too, and when I'm giving them input or guidance about considering where they want to give birth, one of the things that I like to have them consider is how important is it to you to have that one person caring for you. Some women are okay having, it could be one of three midwives and they form a relationship with each of them, and they might have their favorite, but they're okay knowing that it'll be one of these three or four, where other women, just knowing this is my midwife, she's going to be there, is really just vital almost to them.
Yes.
It
Very
provides
important.
them such a peace of mind, and I think that can be especially important too for women that maybe have a history of trauma. They need to form that trusting relationship, because when they trust you, then they can let their guard down a little more and surrender to the process of birth, which you and I know, especially in a natural birth, is really the key. If you want to be in control in labor, you have to be able to
Yes.
surrender, right?
Yes. Yes. There's been a couple of births where I truly felt that this mama was just stuck in her head and had to pull her aside and just talk with her one on one and lay it down and let them finally acknowledge what they have to let go and surrender and let this baby do what it needs to do to be born.
Right. And that's where that trusting and intimate relationship is so helpful, I think.
Yeah, we want to create a very loving and peaceful space for the mom. But I also want her to know that she is in a very safe environment.
Right, right. I've always said I think it's really important for a woman to feel safe when she's giving birth. That's key. So
Yeah.
if the thought of having a home birth is scary to you because you feel like a hospital is safer, then a home birth isn't the right plan for you. Sometimes the birth center can kind of be that in between step, but for mamas that hate hospitals, are scared to death of them, then really considering a home birth or a birth center birth is a better option because they're going to be able to feel safe and relax and let go and ultimately release their baby. Now, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes there's cases where because of the mama's health, they're not able to do that. But the difference with this midwifery care, I think, is that midwives tend to provide more guidance just on nutrition and taking care of yourself. And please, I'm not meaning to bash OBs because there are some incredible, incredible OBs out there. And
Yes.
part of the problem is just the way our medical system is. They would like to give their patients more time. It just isn't feasible the way things are set up right now. And I'm hoping that's going to be something that comes out of this pandemic as we look at the places where our medical system is failing us in many ways and failing the providers, not just the patients. But this difference with midwives is they tend to, how is your nutrition? I remember when I had my third baby, I was so surprised. The midwives made me give them a diet log. We want to see what you're eating. And they actually went over it to make sure you were getting wholesome and good nutrition. Let's do our best to keep you healthy, keep your baby healthy, help prevent preeclampsia through maintaining better health.
Michelle, that's one of the things that I very much enjoy about doing home birth is my home visits that I do. I get a chance to look around, just see their environment. And there's so many times that the clients will say, oh no, I'm eating this. But truth be told, maybe they really aren't.
Mm,
And it's a chance to not condemn them in any way, but help them choose better choices.
yeah.
When I see that they're maybe eating a lot of processed foods, pastas, all of that, and I see them gaining quite a bit of weight, I can talk with them about choosing better choices on the pasta, of maybe doing more of the whole grains, brown rice, that type of a thing. And if I can see it and help them with it, I feel like for them, they come out of their shell and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, thank you. Thank you for identifying that and helping me work through it.
Right. It really surprises me how many of my clients that I work with as a doula, as a childbirth educator, that are not given really much information at all about nutrition and pregnancy. It's just very, very basic. And then I've found from personal experience years ago and listening to some of my mamas, it's almost like the mamas end up feeling at fault, and sometimes women are just going to develop preeclampsia. We're still trying to understand it, but the moms themselves, then they feel it's their fault, but they haven't really been given proper guidance. Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Yes. What did I do wrong and why did I do
Right.
this way? And it's because you weren't given a choice of trying to change things.
Right. And to do nutritional things to support your body.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes you and I know sometimes women will just develop preeclampsia.
Yes.
But if we can do these more preventative measures, or let's talk about early in your pregnancy, how to keep your blood sugar stable
Right.
versus I have so many mamas now that gestational diabetes test, I don't even have words, the amount of panic and tears and fear that it can bring.
Because there's so much of false high numbers.
Mm,
I totally understand it. That's why most midwives will also give the client an opportunity to do a breakfast versus the drink that's there.
right, because that doesn't really monitor how your body's
Right.
processing it. Most pregnant women aren't going to drink 50 grams of straight glucose.
Correct.
And most moms are eating more healthy in their pregnancy anyway. But that's a whole nother that's a whole other subject. But it's sad to me the amount of fear that a lot of mamas are under or facing inductions because they're over 35, and it doesn't really take into account that woman and her specific pregnancy. Whereas midwifery care as a whole, hospital and birth center or at home, tends to view the woman and her pregnancy as an individual.
Yes.
And how is her body responding to this pregnancy? So, what are some of the common questions you get if someone's thinking about switching to a midwifery practice? And I don't know if I'm sure you've probably found this, but recently I had a mama that moved here I think she lived in New York, and she moved here at 24 weeks. And she was having a terrible time finding care. She ended up having to go with the high risk clinic and the midwives out of our major high risk hospital because one of the few options that would take her was too far of a distance away, the practice. And then some people are just, like I said, they're unsure about home birth or midwifery care. But it's a problem here, I've found, that you can't find care. You can't switch after 28 weeks or 24 weeks, even if you've had care. Whereas with home birth midwives, you'll generally take someone later in pregnancy if they choose to switch.
Yeah, the switching late in pregnancy, that's more so of OBs. You'll hear that. And I don't understand why they don't want to take them late in care, especially if they have the prenatal care up until that point. However, as long as you've had care and you are under the low risk guidelines that the state of Florida provides for us, we will take you into care at any point in the pregnancy. The biggest questions that I get from clients calling in is going to be, if something's wrong, where's the nearest hospital?
Right.
And, we talk about that, and I let them know that being at home, I don't wait until things get so out of hand that we can't make it to a hospital. By law, we have to be within 30 miles, 30 minutes of a NICU. But that being said, I let my mamas and my families know that if we have to transfer, we're going to be transferring before we're going to need that 911 emergency transfer. Because just transferring in itself can be very scary moment. And that is what the mama is going to hold on to for that labor and birth. And if we have to transfer, I want to make sure that it's very smooth and easygoing for the families.
Yeah, as much as possible.
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. And, that's why you were my daughter's midwife,
Yeah.
because I want someone that is going to have that discernment of, you know what, I don't like these heart tones that are happening, or I don't know if you'd use those words, but I'm feeling uncomfortable. Your baby's telling me that we really need to transfer, and doing it in a calm and loving way, but doing it at an appropriate time before things get too out of control.
Yep.
So, for the audience, could you share some scenarios that could warrant transfer?
Sure.
Because a lot of times that is a big question.
Yeah. So during pregnancy, when we're doing all the blood work, one of the big key factors that we're looking at is the mom's hemoglobin. And what you'll hear a lot of us say, their iron, their hemoglobin and hematocrit. So this is the iron of the blood volume that they have. And it's really important to us that we have a good hemoglobin in case the mom bleeds, which we expect her to bleed. That's a normal occurrence with delivering a baby. However, if you have a really low hemoglobin, just bleeding a little bit could be detrimental for mama and baby. So that's one of the things that we look for. If the hemoglobin is too low, then that would be a reason that we would transfer. And in that case, we would even transfer before the birth.
Right. They'd have to switch during their pregnancy.
Correct. That's an antepartum transfer reason. Another reason would be if the baby was breech and she's to her due date.
Mm.
And I say that because to her due date, because we're finding that even after 36 weeks, if the baby is breech, we will send them for a consult, and the OBs are giving you're not in labor yet. The baby still has time to turn, which I'm so thankful for.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because the baby does have time to turn. However, if you're getting to your due date just about there and baby is still breached, that would be another reason to transfer.
Right. Because here in Florida, we cannot do breaches at home.
We cannot do knowing breaches at home. Correct.
And even in the hospital setting, the one physician that would do breech births, he retired. And so really the only option is the cesarean birth. That's what our protocols are here. But there are things you can do to help turn the baby. And that's what's nice about midwives too, is they help their clients explore these options to get the baby to turn.
Oh, yes. So midwives at your appointment, we have our hands on your belly and we're doing Leopold maneuvers, which helps us identify the parts of the baby, of where the head is, where the feet are, where the baby's butt is, whether baby's head down or transverse, which is sideways, gives us information to be able to help mama do different positionings to let the baby go head down. So whether that's, we talk about doing spinning babies or just doing some hands and knees and rocking their hips a little bit every single night to allow that baby to get into position. It's long talks and discussions at their prenatal visits about all of this.
Right. Exploring acupuncture and chiropractic.
Yes.
And I've provided your mamas, here's a guided meditation to help your baby turn head down. And a lot of times I've had babies turn just with that. They need a little encouragement. So
Yep.
It's nice to have these different alternatives. And it really surprises me how some of my clients are telling me that their physician, like the nurse, may measure their belly, but they're not palpating their belly.
No.
They're not feeling the babies, the Leopold maneuvers. They're not doing it. And I feel like it's a little bit of a tangent, but we're losing the art of palpating their belly sometimes because we're so reliant on technology. And I'm not saying that technology is bad and wrong, because it's absolutely life-saving. But some of my clients will, how will we know how big my baby is if we don't do a sonogram at the end of pregnancy? And I'll kind of giggle a little bit, and I'll say, I trust Mary's hands getting the size
Yes.
of a baby over a sonogram a lot of times, because they can be off by a pound or more, and you just have a DAC. I'm not making this up to families. She can palpate a belly at the end of pregnancy and get that baby's weight, or when the mama's in labor, get it within ounces. It's absolutely incredible, this gift she has. So.
I like to, whenever I have a client that is concerned at the end about the weight of the baby and so on and so forth, I always remind them of a client that I had. It was with the birth center. We did have to transfer in labor because we just could not get her contractions coordinated enough. And when we went into the hospital, she was postdates. So we had a late ultrasound, what's called a biophysical profile. And when we got to the hospital, they were saying, well, this baby could be up to 10 pounds, and that could be the reason. And I said to the parents, this baby is not too big. And I have had my hands on your belly for your whole pregnancy. And I am telling you that this baby is X, Y, and Z. I want to say I had told her that the baby was like 8 pounds. When they did finally have the baby, she did have to have Pitocin to get the contractions regular. And she did have the baby. Her husband looked at me when they weighed the baby, and he had this huge smile on his face because he said out loud, our midwife knew exactly. I had it to the ounce. I thought it was very funny, but in that moment, I was like, these people are not going to think that he's very funny shouting that out, because her whole labor, they kept saying, oh, maybe this baby is too big. And her husband was very, very good at, the baby's fine, my wife is fine, we want to continue. And she ultimately did have a very happy, healthy 8-pound baby vaginally. It just took her time to do it.
Right. Yeah. And I want to say too, my little daughter, who's 5'1", I shouldn't call her a little daughter. She's an adult woman, but she's tiny. You know how tiny my daughter is. And my little tiny daughter pushed out a 9-pound baby with an intact perineum, without a tear. And so sometimes we also don't give our bodies enough credit. And I don't even necessarily consider 9 pounds that big of a baby, but my daughter's only 5'1", and she's kind of tiny. She's tiny.
Yes.
She's a tiny girl. So there is that possibility too of what our bodies are capable of. So if a mama is in labor and you're just not having an adequate contraction pattern, that could be a reason to transfer. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Another, I don't want to say common, but another one that I see for transfer is if the water is broken for 24 hours and we can't get a good active labor pattern going. Sometimes mom's blood pressure will increase, and we talk about it. We can try putting you in the tub to see if that brings down your blood pressure.
If it's up due to pain, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because the water will help alleviate the pain.
The
right?
water birth will help with that. It doesn't take away the pain, but it certainly will help the mother deal with the pain a lot better.
Yeah.
If nothing that we do helps with the blood pressure, then, we talk about transferring.
Right. And I know from watching some of those baby shows years ago, I remember watching one and the mom, her water either released on its own, that bag of waters broke, or the midwife ruptured it manually.
Mhm.
And there was meconium, which is the baby's first bowel movement, if you're not familiar with that term, families. And the narrator, of course, they stop it when they're like, there's meconium. And it was this whole big to do when they came back in. Oh my gosh, there's meconium. Will she be able to have her home birth or will she have to transfer? And they made it so incredibly scary. So, can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, yes. So there's levels of meconium, and there's time in the pregnancy when we would almost acknowledge that there will be meconium. If the mom is post dates, meaning past her due date, there's a better possibility of seeing meconium than if the water broke at 38 weeks.
Right, right,
And then there's the significance of meconium if there's pieces or particles in there versus the waters just being tinged the brown or green, yellowish green fluid. So if her water was to break and it was brown with pieces, that tells us that it's fresh and that the baby is in some sort of distress. And therefore, we would transfer to the hospital so the baby can be monitored even a little bit more closely. If mom is almost 42 weeks and her water breaks and it's more of a yellowish greenish color and there's no pieces of particles in it, that tends to be the older side of meconium. And that means at some point something happened with the baby and it did have a bowel movement within the womb. But the fact that there's no pieces or particles and baby's sounding good and mom is having contractions and things are going on, that is not as worrisome because it's expected. The mom is past her due date.
right. I always say it's like the plumbing's working and the baby's getting
Yes.
squeezed, you know?
Yes, yes, that's a good analogy. Yes, that the plumbing is working well.
Right,
And, we still monitor. I would monitor that mama and baby even a little bit more just to make sure that it wasn't a fluke thing. But it's something that we would almost expect to see.
right. And you have equipment and you're prepared to
Yes.
handle that type of
Yeah.
situation, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Because it can always be, I found a lot of times clients are frightened about that, or they're frightened about the baby's cord being around the baby's neck, which happens more frequently than people realize. And you're trained to handle that. All birth providers are.
Yeah, I actually had a baby be born with the cord wrapped around its neck 4 times.
Wow.
Yeah. So when the baby is born and the head comes out, we check for a cord. And then if there is a cord there, we take care of it. Most of the time, it's loose enough to where we can just take it and wrap it out from the head. And then baby's born, no big deal. Sometimes it's wrapped tight to where we can't do that. And then we help the mom birth the baby in what we call somersault, where we help the baby somersault out of the cord. This particular one, when the baby was born, it was loose. This baby just had the cord of 10 miles long, I guess.
Yeah, I would say it sounds like a really long cord. Yeah.
As when I unwrap the cord, I always tell my birth assistant what I'm doing so they can document it for me. And I remember saying to her, we have a nuchal cord, and I was 1, 2, 3. And when I got to the third one, my birth assistant said, "Really?" And I was like, "Really?" And we got to that fourth one. By the time I got to the fourth one, the mom was already pushing the baby the rest of the way out, and baby was very happy and healthy and screaming by the time it got into mom's arms, and all was well. But that was 4 times around the baby's neck, and baby was happy, healthy, pink. Everything was good with this baby. So having this fear out there of, but the cord around the baby's neck, there's so many different varieties and situations surrounding that one piece of information, I don't want to have the moms scared with that one piece of information, because there's so much more that is involved in that.
Right. And a lot of times, if it's going to be an issue, you notice it in the baby's heart tones.
Yes, we hear it before.
And that's why we would want to transfer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other instances where it might warrant a transfer in birth that you want to mention? We're just kind of giving a few scenarios for people.
For postpartum, so now that the baby's born, everyone is safe, and we want to feel that, we want to think that, but there's still possible complications that could arise. And that is the placenta being born and having pieces of the placenta still attached. So once the placenta is born, we do take a look at it. Everyone thinks, oh, the placenta, it's so cool. I want to see it and look at it. And I always tell my clients, I will be more than happy to educate you on this wonderful, beautiful organ, but I need to look at it first to make sure everything is here, that there's no retained products. And looking at it, we want to make sure that the cord and bag and all the pieces of the placenta are there and intact. If mom is bleeding and she's bleeding a little bit too much, that could be one of the reasons. So sometimes all the excitement about checking the placenta, we have to put on hold for just a moment so the midwife can do the evaluation of the placenta and make sure that everything is there for the mom.
Right.
And then bleeding, everyone expects to bleed, and it's a normal occurrence. But like I was saying before, of us wanting to check mom's hemoglobin, hematocrit, and her platelets, is to have a better understanding on bleeding. Because if a mom has a low hemoglobin, and what's low to midwives is nowhere near what's low to OBs, because they have a blood bank near them,
right,
where they can get blood products for the mom. If I have a mom with maybe a slightly lower hemoglobin, I'm going to talk to her about giving her postpartum Pitocin if she's bleeding a little bit heavier than what I would like to see. versus waiting for her to get to that postpartum hemorrhage point, which I don't want to see any of my moms get to that point, because that's the point that we would have to transfer. And nobody wants to be away from their baby postpartum.
Exactly. And so it's part of that being really proactive, to be proactive in the pregnancy.
Yes.
And I know sometimes people are concerned about baby's shoulders getting stuck, shoulder dystocia, but I try to reassure clients that home birth, birth center, midwives are trained in that.
Yeah.
And they have the techniques to handle that. And the difference in that too is home birth and birth center mamas giving birth, they are not able to have an epidural. So they're not going to be numb for the waist down. So these mamas can turn and move to help facilitate the baby to maneuver to come out and be born, versus in the hospital where you're on your back with your feet in stirrups. It's a more difficult situation. Yes?
Yes. You know, like I said, as a licensed midwife, you are trained to work with dystocia. We are taught breech birth for the just in case.
That's right.
And the way to manage these types of birth is to move the mom and to move the baby. So things like the shoulder dystocia and having a surprise breech baby come our way, we know how to manage these births, and we have the necessities to help the baby be born in the safe environment. We are trained extensively for the breech birth and the shoulder dystocia and the postpartum hemorrhage, retained placenta, all of those. But also, while we are managing this, per Florida law, those types of things, we would also be calling 911 so we can get the help. But most of the time, in my experience, when I've had a shoulder dystocia or the postpartum hemorrhage and I'm calling 911, everything is resolved by the time 911 gets there.
Right. So as we're establishing what midwifery looks like in these different settings, home birth and birth center, there's a lot of similarities. Home birth, you get to stay at home. Birth center, you go to the midwives, to the center. Most times a birth center is located very close to a hospital, and that can give people assurances. But what would you say were some of the differences between home birth and birth center, because you have worked in both arenas?
Right. So I would say the biggest difference with a birth center versus a home birth would be that you typically are closer to a hospital with the birth center. But I also like to tell the clients that the birth center, you're just using our home. Birth centers tend to be still in that home-like environment. You have your own bedroom that you use, which they call birth suites, but it's as home-like as possible. So the mama will feel free to move around and be at peace of where she is with the birth. But if you're at your own home, you have your very own surroundings, and the midwife with the home birth still brings the life-saving medications, the IVs, all that with her. None of that is being missed. It would just be where you ultimately live, as far away as you are from the hospital. And with the state of Florida, you have to be 30 minutes, 30 miles away from a NICU.
Yeah, which is, I think, a good requirement.
It is. It is a good.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when my daughter gave birth to her first, she was 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes away from our major women and babies hospital. So, that affords for us, for many people, a sense of peace because you know that you're very close. Where she's living now, there's not a hospital very close.
No.
And so a birth center would be a better alternative, I feel like, in that case, than doing a home birth.
And there are some times where our clients, they don't want to be in their own home to give birth, but they also want to birth their way.
Right.
So that's where the birth center is a really, really good happy medium option, because they don't have to stay in their home. They can go somewhere to give birth, but yet they're not tied down to the hospital atmosphere.
Right, right. With birth center care and home birth care, you don't have that extended postpartum care. For example, often in a birth center, you stay 4 to 6 hours, maybe a little bit longer. Or if they need to keep an eye on a mama longer, then a mama's going to stay longer.
They stay longer.
But usually you leave within 4 to 6 hours or so.
Yeah.
Because birth is a normal, healthy process. And for some people, that's great. They're like, yep, let me get home, get in my own place. I just want to be in my own bed. And other people, that can be a little disconcerting. But you provide a lot of education beforehand and there at the birth to help them to know how to care for themselves postpartum. And you're in constant contact. And I feel like one of the beautiful things with home birth and birth center care is you are in close contact. It's so helpful even when you're in labor. They help you figure out when you need to go to the birth center, when it's time for the midwife to come to your house. They help you figure that out. You're not alone in that. But postpartum, you see your midwife again 3 days postpartum. And then you usually see her 2 weeks later. And again at 6 weeks. And she's typically a text or a phone call away.
Yes.
Versus so often the way our midwifery care is, a mama gives birth, she has her pediatrician appointments, but she doesn't see her caregiver again for 6 weeks.
Yeah. And I have to tell my clients several times before I leave their home, because they know that I am a text or a phone call away, of letting them know that if they need me, if it's something that they need to talk with me right away, they need to call and not just text me. Because if I am sleeping, I won't get the text message. And they need to know that if they need to get a hold of me, they need to call me. And of course, I would wake up to the phone call. But I think that gives them a good sense of security to know that all the way through their postpartum, I'm a phone call away. It helps them with okay, is this normal, Mary? And they'll send me a picture and we can talk about it, of whatever it is that they're calling me on, whether it's their bleeding went from really light to really heavy, and they call me and they're like, oh my goodness, my bleeding went from light to heavy, and they didn't think about it, but they're only a couple days postpartum. They shouldn't be going grocery shopping yet.
Right. I always say, if you start bleeding bright red blood 3 days postpartum, 2 days postpartum, you are doing too much. Get back in your bed.
Yes.
I say it nicer, but yeah.
But, they need to hear that, though, especially if this isn't their first one, because they feel like they need to be running after their toddler. And I have to remind them, no, you just had another baby. This is your time to heal.
Right.
Right.
So Right. Women, all women, no matter where you give birth, they forget
Yes.
that you have a wound in your uterus the size of that placenta, which on average is about the size of a dinner plate,
Yeah.
and it needs to heal. You just can't see it. And it shrinks down as the uterus shrinks down, but that's still the size of that wound. If it was on the outside of your body or on your chest, you wouldn't be running around
Yeah.
taking care of it because we can't see it. We run around. Or women that do need a repair to their bottom, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be out using those dirty potties in the store. Like, stay home.
Stay
Stay home.
home.
So that's our little advice for today. So if families are considering switching, what are their alternatives payment wise? Is it strictly self-pay? Does some insurance cover it? Can you give a little insight on that? And I know it's different everywhere, I'm sure.
Right. So most insurance companies will cover your home birth, but whether or not the midwife is in network is going to be a whole nother situation there. Most midwives also will take Medicaid, which is the state run insurance. Just like everything else, if you have insurance and your midwife is in network with the insurance, then you're going to have your deductible and so on and so forth. But some of the stuff that isn't paid for by the insurance or Medicaid is going to be things like if you rent the tub for a water birth from your midwife, that will cost you. A lot of home birth midwives have a administrative fee to help offset the costs of them driving out to your home for the prenatals and your birth and your postpartums. And a lot of midwives, if you come to them late into care, then they'll do a self-pay because there's just not going to be enough time to work with the insurance if you're out of network. So there's many different areas in that. What I would say is, first and foremost, find a midwife that you connect with, because if you're transferring late in care, that's going to be a very, very crucial part,
Yeah.
is that you're finding someone that you can already connect with and you feel safe with.
Right.
And then talk about payment and how that looks. So because of us being in the middle of this pandemic of the COVID-19, I have had several people reach out to me, and we talk about their insurance because myself, I am not in network with any major insurance companies at this time. So we make a plan, but my first thing that I want to work on with them is, do we feel that I'm the right midwife for them? Do we have a connection already together? And if we do, then we go and we work out the pricing and what that looks like.
So on average, I know it can vary by state,
Yep.
but what would you, like here in Florida, what is the average cost of a home birth?
So for self-pay home birth with me, if they're going to do the water birth and all their labs and the whole shebang all put together, is roughly $6,200.
Right. Which for all that prenatal care, it's really, if you break it down, it's pretty reasonable,
Yeah.
I think. But for some people, it's just insurance covers the hospital. I need that financial difference. My care is covered in the hospital. And so financially, I really need to make that choice. Sometimes it'll cover birth center over home birth in some places.
yes, there are some insurances out there that they will cover a birth center, but they will not cover a home birth.
But I think something to consider too is what is the average cost of a birth in the hospital? And what is your deductible going to be? What percentage do you have to pay of the bill? And if it's going to come up to roughly $6,000, and this is something that's important to you,
Yeah.
then that's something to consider as well. What's your deductible going to be?
Yeah.
What is the fee going to be that you pay? Because I know some clients pay a certain percentage of their hospital bill.
Yeah.
Your stories, it's anywhere from $16,000 up just for the hospital stay?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the exact numbers, but just walking in, having a birth, not doing the epidural and so on and so forth, you're looking at 10 grand.
Yeah.
Just walking in the door
Yeah.
and saying, I'm having contractions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm probably figuring in an epidural or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody were thinking of transferring to home birth, especially with everything going on right now with the coronavirus pandemic, what would you recommend they look for in their midwife? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I would suggest to them calling and interviewing a couple different midwives in their area and really looking at what it is that they truly want or need versus of a home birth and birth center. And if it's on their heart that they don't want to go to the hospital, but they don't necessarily feel as safe of doing a home birth, then to look at birth center midwives and interview a couple. Go and, if I'm not mistaken, with the pandemic, they're not doing like open houses, but they're doing virtual tours. So you can see what the space looks like. And, if everyone has their little things that they could look at a room and go, that color is going to drive me insane.
Right. Visual people that have a visual learning style. Yes, that would be very important. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, and you want to make sure that that's not going to be an issue for you when you are in labor. That is not the time to be like, oh my gosh, get rid of those drapes. I can't stand looking at them, type of a thing. But if home birth is something that is on your heart and it's something that you really want to do, and maybe this is your first baby and you were just going through the motions when you got pregnant and you had the OB, and now this going on with the hospitals, you're like, oh, no, there's that ringing in your head saying you need to revisit having this baby at home, then truly look into and interview different midwives. You'll know it. You'll have that feeling, that sense of, this is my person and this is my midwife. And when you have that feeling, go with it.
Yes. Listen to your gut. Listen to your gut.
Yes.
And in case you're feeling just really overwhelmed, there is the meditation that I did in episode 29 of the podcast that helps you to go within and connect with your inner wisdom in order to help make this decision. But listen to your gut, listen to your heart. And if you're feeling that transferring is the best thing for you and your baby, please start to consider doing it now versus waiting a few weeks, because my concern, and it's not just my concern, I think, is that home birth midwives, birth center midwives, they're already starting to reach their client load.
Yes.
So if this is on your heart, then begin to take those steps now, and you can just interview and see. Sometimes when you get those answers of, yes, they do things to help ensure that if I'm bleeding too much, they can take care of that. They have medication for that. They carry oxygen. I can get a birth certificate for my baby. Like all these questions that you might have, then they can be answered. And again, as Mary is so wisely saying, make sure you resonate with that caregiver. Birth is such an intimate experience, and having that trust with your midwife is absolutely crucial. I think it's a huge part of that ability to let go and be at home and feel safe. So if you had a pearl of wisdom, something that's on your heart, because that's the whole point of this series, and I'm so honored you get to be the first midwife I'm interviewing in this, Mary.
Yes.
What is what is in your heart? Yeah, so I have goosebumps. I'm so grateful. What's on your heart to share with families?
So it kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. And that little piece of wisdom is to let families know that birth can't be done out of fear. So if you had in your head that you were having this hospital birth because that is where you felt safe, and now you don't feel safe being at the hospital, take a moment with you and your partner and just have a quiet moment and think about it in your heart. Where is it that you feel the safest? And if it's still at the hospital, then make your plans on how to have the best birth possible for you at the hospital. If it's not at the hospital and you feel that it would be better at a birth center or having a home birth midwife, then go out there with your partner and start doing the interviews. Don't choose the first thing that you see on the internet. Don't go with that first ad that you see. Do your research, look into it, do your interviews. And when you find that person that you feel comfortable and safe with, you'll know it. You'll know it. And that is the way to have your safe, peaceful birth when you have the surroundings of chaos.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And preparation.
Yeah.
I feel like the mamas that I work with now, that we are developing these true relaxation techniques. Like you've seen it, Mary. Our mamas, they are absolutely incredible. Incredible. I've seen them be more calm than a mom with an epidural. Like it is just amazing. And having that ability to go within, no matter what's going on, I think even if a birth doesn't go the way that you need it, having that ability to go within and listen to your body and be prepared and have that relaxation habit to help stay out of fight, flight, or freeze, it is crucial. It's crucial in this time.
Yeah.
And know too that you can still have doula services with a doula virtually, that is a possibility
Yeah.
as well. And is it the same as having us there in person? No, but we can watch. We watch a good doula, a good midwife, a good nurse. We watch and we see. And for my mamas that I work with, they're so attuned to the sound of my voice that if I am speaking to them and they can hear me over an iPad and I can watch and see what's going on, I feel like I can still deliver a pretty good level of care, even though I'm not there in person to rub their back. But we've created these skills, and even if I'm not there, they have recordings and things to listen to. So is it nice to have us there in person? Absolutely. But make that plan and listen to your gut and make your decisions from that place of centeredness is what I believe Mary and I are wanting to convey.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So if someone wanted to reach out to you, Mary, how can they find you?
they can go to my website, which is biamidwifery.com. There's wonderful links on there about water birth, and you can find more information about myself and my birth assistant. We're also on Facebook. You can look up Blessings in Abundance Midwifery Care or at BIA Midwifery. And I'm also on Instagram. If you want to look at Instagram, it's at Surprenant LMCPM. And it's my last name, SURPRENANT LMCPM.
Thank you so much, Mary. I was so thrilled when you agreed to do this interview with me. I just feel it's so timely so that families can better understand how to navigate these uncertain times.
Yeah.
So thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you for your love of birth. I have to say, Mary is someone that loves birth. Absolutely loves it. It just bubbles forth from her.
Yep.
It truly does.
It's my calling. It's my passion. It's my calling.
It truly is. It truly is. So thank you, families, for listening. Mary and I said a little prayer before we started this that our conversation could provide some insights and even a bit of calm in a very uncertain time right now. So we will be holding you all in our thoughts and our prayers for health, for peace in uncertain times, and for beautiful, peaceful birthings. Thank you so much for listening. And if you're enjoying the show, please share it with a friend. And you can rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Because when you do, that helps get the show and the information out to more people.
For more great conversations like these, or to find out more information and access Michelle's library of amazing guests, go to birtheseservices.com/podcast. For more information on the Birthease method, Michelle's classes, meditations, and other services, go to birtheseservices.com.